Rome commanded an empire of somewhere between 60 and 70 million people, stretching all the way across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And they did it not just with armies, but with a weapon that was 50,000 miles long. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating piece of history. Because the single point of control for this entire massive network wasn't a fortress or a legion. It was a single gilded column right in the heart of the Roman Forum. This is the story of how one monument, the Militarium Arum, was the secret to building and controlling the ancient world. Think about it like this. Modern roads, they can completely crumble in a matter of decades. Bridges require constant, painstaking maintenance. And the logistics of our globalized world today depend on satellites and fiber optics, a really fragile digital web. But 2,000 years ago, the Romans built an empire bound together by 50,000 miles of stone and gravel. It was a physical network so unbelievably robust that portions of it are actually still in use today. So, how exactly did they pull it off? How could one single monument in Rome dictate the movement of massive armies and diverse cultures across an entire continent? What did they know that we've perhaps forgotten? Well, the answer lies in a very powerful idea. An idea that you could stand at one specific spot, the center of the known world, and from there, measure and master an entire empire. Before we can truly grasp the genius of their solution, we have to appreciate the scale of the problem. Let's look at Section 1, the Imperial Logical Nightmare. By the 1st century BCE, the Republic was groaning under its own weight. Control was a really tenuous thing. Imagine you're a Roman governor in Hispania facing a sudden rebellion. Dispatching a messenger to Rome on muddy tracks could take weeks, a tyranny of distance that literally threatened the survival of the empire. And moving an army back to help, that was an absolute nightmare. When you break down the numbers for a single Roman legion on the move, you got 5,120 heavily armed legionaries, about 295 officers, 1,400 military slaves, and 1,600 mules carrying their gear. That is over 7,000 men and nearly 2,000 animals that all need to march together, make camp together, and most importantly, not starve. Now, if you get that massive group on a 6-meter wide paved road, it actually runs like clockwork. Marching 6 abreast, that column is kept tight at about 1.9 kilometers long, and it takes just 23 minutes to pass a given point. But force them off-road onto a narrow, muddy track. That same column stretches out to nearly 4 kilometers. It takes almost an hour to pass by, and suddenly they become a highly vulnerable target for ambush. Because, as any ancient general knew all too well, maintaining a fast, predictable pace wasn't just a matter of strategy, it was literally the difference between feeding your troops and losing them completely. A slow army is a starving army, and a starving army is a defeated army. To survive, Rome needed to shrink the world, which brings us to Section 2, the Golden Milestone. To conquer this tyranny of distance, they needed a literal and symbolic center to coordinate everything. So, Emperor Caesar Augustus erected the Militarium Arum, or Golden Milestone, near the Temple of Saturn. This wasn't just some shiny decoration for the city. It established a single ground zero for the entire empire's logistical network. It was the absolute mathematical anchor for the Roman world. The core philosophy was incredibly clear. All roads throughout the empire were considered to begin at this monument, and all distances in the empire were measured relative to it. Conceptually, mathematically, every single paved path, whether it was winding through the plains of Gaul or stretching across the deserts of Syria, tied straight back to this exact spot in Rome. So how did they actually build it? Let's turn to Section 3, Engineering the Nervous System. Remember, they pulled this off without computers or modern lasers. Roman engineers relied on 3 incredibly precise instruments to carve perfectly leveled pathways through nature. First, they used the groma to establish straight horizontal lines and perfect right angles. Then, the dioptra, which functioned like an ancient theodolite to measure distance and vertical angles. And finally, the chorobates. This was essentially a 6-meter-long beam acting as a water level to measure slopes, making sure their roads and aqueducts maintained an absolutely precise gradient. And the engineering had to be flawless, because the loads these roads carried were staggering. Just think about this number for a second. 240,000. That is the estimated number of cartloads of heavy travertine stone that had to be transported from a quarry 20 miles away just to build the Colosseum. Their layered road engineering wasn't just for moving soldiers. It allowed heavily loaded carts carrying 30 to 50 massive stones each to travel efficiently. Without that rock-solid infrastructure, constructing megastructures like the Colosseum would have been fundamentally impossible. The sheer weight of those carts would have just pulverized anything less robust. And of course, there was the military advantage. Section 4. Moving the Roman legions. With this network in place, Rome could project power at speeds the world had never seen. By utilizing these 6-meter-wide paved roads, a colossal legion could march 6 men abreast. They kept that column incredibly tight at a 1.9-kilometer length, and they moved at a steady, predictable 5 kilometers an hour. This turned what used to be a multi-week, agonizing trek into a rapid deployment. If a province rebelled, Rome could respond before the situation spiraled out of control. But the roads did more than move armies. Let's look at Section 5, connecting a diverse empire. Those 50,000 miles of stone actually carried the very idea of Rome itself. As the empire expanded to include incredibly diverse peoples across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, the leadership faced a huge question. How do you make a Spaniard, a Gaul, and a Greek all feel fundamentally Roman? They needed a shared cultural identity. The roads became the ultimate delivery mechanism for that cultural export. They allowed Rome to impose a unified system of law and taxation. They spread Roman goods, architecture, and trade. They even transported exotic animals and gladiators from far-flung regions, which facilitated the construction of over 230 amphitheaters across the empire. Honestly, amphitheaters were essentially the vanguard of the empire. They were a powerful symbol of Rome and Romanness. By building a mini Colosseum in a distant province, supplied entirely by this incredible road network, Rome was basically convincing conquered populations that the Roman way of life was superior. The spectacle itself became a tool of assimilation. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought to wrap up this explainer. If stone roads and the golden milestone unified the ancient world, what are the golden milestones and invisible infrastructures holding our modern globalized world together today? What fragile digital webs of control are keeping us connected right now? And how do they really compare to the 50,000 miles of stone that built an empire? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.